Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at Iraq voting in a general election for the very first time since the definitive pullout of U.S.-led forces in 2011 this Wednesday. Baghdad's been under lockdown. They've even stopped traffic to prevent car bombs. That's to give you an idea of how much there's been a spike in violence of late. With us to talk about it, Régis Le Sommier, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the French weekly news magazine Paris Match. Also with us, Iraqi political commentator Abdelraman Dara SULEIMAN, who showed us in part one that he'd done his civic duty with the vote. There you go. And joining us from Sana'a in Yemen, Zaid al-Ali, who works on constitutional issues with the Constitution Building the International Idea Organization, and joining us from Abu Dhabi, Hadeel al-SAYEGH, of senior reporter at a daily newspaper, The National. Welcome back to all of you. Nuri alMaliki, he did his civic duty in Baghdad early this Wednesday morning. Afterwards, he spoke to reporters, and yes, security was on his lips.
I invite all Iraqi people to come to the ballot box en masse. Every voter has the right to criticize, judge, and keep the government in check. Those who do not participate in this vote lose that right. I don't want any citizen to lose their right to make their decision about those elected to Parliament. I am hoping for a large turnout, and I hope voters will make wise choices so that we will be happy with these elections. We must work against terrorism and work against those who've been counting on these elections to not run on time.
Régis Le Sommier, the star power of Nuri alMaliki has certainly waxed and waned over the past 8 years where he's been prime minister. At first, people said, oh, he's just an ineffectual consensus candidate. Then he became this guy who outfoxed the cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. And now we're seeing again this spike in violence. How do you think Nuri alMaliki will be remembered?
Well, I think he will be remembered both weak and strong. Weak because he started. Let's remember how his term started. He was chosen because George Bush wanted somebody who could, suit the Americans, and it was the ambassador to Iraq, Zalila, at that time, who found out that Maliki could possibly be the candidate or the person. And so he was seen at first as an American puppet, and then he raised and managed, quite smartly actually, to outplay his the other competitors, and there were many in the field. And today I said strong because he appears like not that the shadow of Saddam Hussein is there in Iraq forever, but there is still this remembrance of this heavy expression of power. And Maliki certainly plays with that feeling of, being the strong man, which is very important in the Iraqi society. But in the meantime, the place where he's giving his speech is the Rashid Hotel. And the Rashid Hotel is the place where he voted this morning, is the heavily guard, in the middle of the heavily guard former Green Zone, which is still called the Green Zone, by the way, even though the Americans are no longer there. So some of these main guys don't even leave that area. They stay most of the time over there under heavily guarded walls, and so his power he can demonstrate that he can lead, but in another way, we're very much still in a very gated community. I mean, and Iraq still is in that mentality of having people being separated. However, I must say, to follow up the comment about from what's his name?
Zaid al-Ali.
Zaid, yeah. I want to say that there has been some recent move in Baghdad, and you can now again see mixed neighborhoods in Baghdad, which that's a reality. The blast walls are not longer there. most of the violence decreased. Let's remember that. The violence decreased because there weren't anybody to kill anymore, because all the communities were separated. You had a few Sunni enclaves in Baghdad, but the rest of Baghdad was entirely Shia. And most of the Sunni had moved west to the Anbar province. So now we've started to see Iraqi from both sides of Islam coming together and living together again, which is a good sign. But, then again, you talk about the violence. The violence is a daily routine. About 3,000 people killed since the beginning of the year. The situation is not satisfying, but there are, I think, hope signs. And to go back to Maliki, it will, I guess this 6 next months, that used to be a metric that was currently used during the Iraq War. The 6 next month would be crucial to see where the country is going.
And Hadeel al-SAYEGH, is it a sure thing that he will form the next government?
Well, there seems to be a lot of, there's a lack of transparency, first of all, in terms of who are his alliances, in terms of which groups. A lot of people are saying that he might have done like covert kind of coalition, sided with certain coalition groups, and in the sense that if he can't form a majority government, that he will kind of replicate the same scenario that we saw in the last election. Just getting back to that point, the issue now also with Iraq is that we're still, kudos to the Iraqi political analysts who voted today, but, going to the ballot boxes and casting your vote is not enough to really build citizenship in Iraq. Right now, we're not really seeing a growth in terms of the political groups. There's no clear ideology between those certain factions. At the same time, the opposition against Maliki, they're quite weak, and they don't have a very coherent strategy or clarity in order to kind of be a game changer. At the same time, the culture is still very nepotist. There's rampant corruption, and the lack of trust that we've seen since 2005, 2006 has not really been dealt with. So there's still these issues, and they're very pressing issues that need to be dealt with if we were going to look at a way of, moving Iraq forward.
Hadeel, let me ask you, to Abdelraman Dara SULEIMAN's point that he made in part one about how at one point he perceived Maliki to be sort of a consensus candidate for both Iran and the United States. If that is no longer the case today, do you need that in Iraq? Somebody who's supported by all outside players?
I think it's a very tricky situation because Maliki doesn't really have that kind of consensus with the Gulf, and you kind of need at least a regional power that you can kind of ally with. To say that Iran has completely shed its relationship with Maliki would be an understatement. However, he has fallen out of favor with them. But at the same time, the tricky part is that Maliki is seen not as somebody who's completely secular, but someone who's secular when you compare them to the various other political factions. And at the same time, he appeals to a wide range. His constituency is quite broad because he appeals to the middle class as well as the upper middle class. And this is really important. And you see a lot of other various rival political factions that are more geared towards like the lower class. So, for example, and so this is an issue. And that's why he has that kind of popularity.
Let me ask you, how much do you think that Iran weighs on this election?
Well, enormously.
Let me put the question to Abdelraman Dara SULEIMAN.
Yes, I think Iran still have many cards.
Do they have a candidate? Who's their candidate?
Inside Iraq. And it have also many candidates, not only Nuri al-Maliki. Iran knows today that Nuri al-Maliki, it's not the same as he was in 2010. Beside of that, I think the main point, there will be many obstacles and many difficulties to forming the new government after announcing the results of the election.
Does he have, do you think, enough you say Iran has pulled with a lot of candidates. Does we expect Maliki to garner, perhaps, according to polls, 25-30% of the vote, maybe? Does Iran have enough pull to basically garner just a pro-Iranian majority?
I think yes, but Nuri al-Maliki, he's still the nearest for the Iranian agenda. Might be al-Hakim or Muqtada Sadr, they keep some distance. For example, the position of Muqtada Sadr about the crisis in Syria, it's not the same as al-Hakim, it's not the same as al-Maliki. But he will still under some effect and reflect, Iranian reflect.
That's an interesting point. Zaid al-Ali, Muqtada al-Sadr, who the whole world discovered when there was this uprising inside of Baghdad in the neighborhood called Sadr City during the worst of the sectarian violence. He said he doesn't endorse any of the candidates. What is his strategy?
I mean, it's a little bit. I mean, it's not so clear cut. He came out and made a statement around about a month ago, something like that, in which he said he came out very strongly against al-Maliki and said that he was withdrawing from the political scene, and he said that he expressed a huge amount of frustration at the government's performance and the corruption and the nepotism that Hadeel referred to earlier, and he claimed to be withdrawing from the political scene. But 2 days later, all of the MPs that were working under his umbrella organization, the Sadrist movement, announced that they would still be running in the elections, and it appears that things are back to normal, at least for the Sadrist movement. It's so far, at least according to what it is that we've been hearing from the Sadrist movement, and particularly the statement that Muqtada Sadr made a month ago or so. It seems to be the case that they are diehard now opposed to a third term for Nuri al-Maliki. And the same thing appears also to be the case for al-Hakim. That doesn't mean that al-Maliki won't stay in government. He might stay in government, but it looks like that it might be very difficult for him because a lot of cards are stacked against him. You mentioned this very briefly. You mentioned earlier that the polls indicate that he might get somewhere between 25 and 30. I'm not sure I agree with that. The last time, in the last parliamentary election, he got 24%, and that was really at the peak of his popularity. On this occasion, it doesn't seem likely that he's going to match that outcome.
So, Régis Le Sommier, what happens after the elections?
Well, it's hard to say, but I'd like to follow up a little bit on Sadr. Sadr has always been a very tricky political figure in Iraq. I mean, even
he went away for a long time to Iran.
He ran away. He went on the ground. He, went to do some teaching because he wanted to climb up the religious hierarchy. Do his homework and stuff like this before coming back. But even when he had his militia, the Mahdi army, he would sometimes strike deals at very weird moments with the U.S. Army, and sometimes all of a sudden decide that he would keep on fighting them. So he's always been very, very full of surprise. And this time around with this election, his various position, deciding he would, side away from the election, and then, 2 days after coming back. I think, al-Hakim has a more, a consistent position, and it's the Shiite world, and it's really hard for us sometimes to decipher. But Muqtada al-Sadr is really tricky, I think, in that.
So how much influence does Iran have on Iraq?
Well, I think ever since the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and ever since the power has been given to Maliki and to the Shiite political expression in Iraq, I mean, Iran has played a huge part. I mean, all these parties, the Dawah party was formed in exile, all these people has been, one way or the other, had an influence at one point in their life, an Iranian influence. So it's obvious that Iraq has fallen into the Iran camp, if you will, after the U.S. And right now it's sort of a different, it's not as favorable in Tehran. I mean, Maliki is definitely not in favor in Tehran as he used to be, but still, it's a part of the global Shiite world in the area, and with the Syrian war, obviously this has been a key ally to Bashar al-Assad.
Zaid al-Ali?
Just a point of clarification. The what was previously referred to as SCIRI, so the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, was formed in Tehran, but the Dawah Party was formed in Iraq in the late 50s, and that's an important distinction between them. And in relation to Iranian influence, obviously Iran has significant influence. There's no question, but there's an important limit to its influence. In the end, these political parties won't go against their own interests. If Iran sends instructions to a particular political party to stand down and not participate and not take up the prime minister's position, then I don't think they would follow through. So there's a limit to Iranian influence that I think people should realize. And in the end, also something that's also very important to remember is that the actual figures, so the percentage points that each of these political parties will be obtaining in the elections. So if Maliki, who in 2010 got 24%, if his popularity declines to 22, 20, 18, it'll be very difficult for him to return. If, on the other hand, his electoral rivals get a lot, their percentages increase significantly, then in the end, Iran's instructions may not matter that much. If they want for Maliki to stay on as prime minister, but he doesn't have enough popular support, then it'll be a paper tiger. There's no question.
Zaid, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing the tone in your voice there, and I'm thinking, I've heard a lot of comments when we were preparing the show about how Iraq is a problem with its viability as a nation state, torn apart as we've been describing in various ways. You're saying, forget all this talk about artificial borders or whatnot. Iraq is Iraq.
I mean, there's no question that we have our own culture and our own cohesiveness. There's absolutely no question about that. And when I go to Iraq, I travel all over the country. I never have any problems with anyone, despite the fact that my ID makes it very clear where it is that I'm from. And people are always very respectful and always very kind to me, no matter where I go. And that's the case for everyone. It's not just me. We have our own culture. There's no question. But at the same time, one has to be realistic. After all the things that have happened in our country, the dictatorship, the Baathists, and all the wars and the sanctions, and then of course the occupation and all the disasters that have unfolded since the occupation, Iraq as a state, it's extremely weak and now exposed to a lot of elements, including foreign influence, which was always present in the past, but nowhere near to the extent that it is today. However, having said that, we still have to wait to see what the electoral results are before we can decide whether or not Iran will have the final say, or whether any other regional powers will have the say, or so on and so forth, right? And something else I should just say as well is that it's very difficult to gauge what it is that the Iranians want exactly. It would be interesting to actually do an interview with them and ask them what it is that they want. But I would expect that what they would want is for some form of stability in their next door neighbor, and that all this violence that's taking place next door to them is actually not good for them. They would probably prefer for there to be a significantly more stability in Iraq, so that they could concentrate on other problems, and so that they wouldn't have so much spillover coming into their country as well. All right, so at least the danger of spillover.
The violence putting to the test Iraq's federalist model. Federalism also put to the test as well in the northern Kurdistan region. Turkey says that it's already stored some 1.5 million barrels of oil through a new pipeline. But to avoid diplomatic blushes, Ankara awaits Baghdad's approval before allowing exports to begin. Let me ask you, Abdelraman, Dara, SULEIMAN, would that be a good idea for the Kurds to directly export their oil through Turkey?
I think it is, and one of the important point of disagreement between Kurdistan and alMaliki. It's the subject of the petrol. Beside another point of disagreement.
But is that then the beginning of the breakup of Iraq? If basically,
I don't think so, because according to that logic of federalism. They agree, the government from the beginning. It's noted on the constitution. Maybe you can ask the question by another way, to say that the constitution have to change, have to as they decide. I agree with that. But according to the constitution, the Kurds are respecting till now what is written inside the constitution. Al-Maliki not. Al-Maliki, he forget all that without changing anything from the constitution.
Hadeel al-SAYEGH, the Turks for now proceeding with caution, waiting to see before they start to really export that oil. Is that a good move on their part?
Yeah, because I think it's a political risk that you're getting yourself involved with. At the same time, it's not going to be to the extent where Baghdad is going to raise arms against Turkey. But at the same time, you can't deny that the Kurds are, they're breaking traditional sovereignty law. The issue between between Baghdad and Erbil has been ongoing for quite some time. And they have fundamentally different views of how they should export oil, how they should pay out oil companies, and to what extent they can control the oil. This is a pressing issue, and at the same time, you have this lack of trust because the Kurds have constantly threatened devolution of the state. They're also very tired of the squabbling that's happening in Baghdad. They're enjoying a very good sense of stability. You have to keep in mind that you had a no-fly zone as early as the 1990s. So they've had a lot of time to kind of build their own state and their institutions. And they see the squabbling that's happening in Baghdad, and it's making things very difficult for them. At the same time, there's been an impact. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. There's been a direct economic impact as a result of this deal. So basically, Baghdad has threatened to and has boycotted the Kurds from having their share of the federal budget for the last 3 months. So if you go to Erbil today, you'll see that there's a direct economic impact across the board because public servants have not been paid their salaries for 3 months. Projects have been put on hold. And this is another level of issues that you have between Baghdad and Erbil right now.
Régis Le Sommier, you think back, you've covered the conflict since the invasion in 2003. You think back to those periods, the ups and downs. Did you think that here in 2014 we'd still have all these issues unresolved? How to handle the oil money, how to really implement federalism, how to give the Sunni minority its say? Well,
yeah, if you think back then, what was the wish of the Americans going into Iraq? This whole thing about creating a democracy, about building a state that could be, and this old idealism that was back then, and what it gave eventually, well. It's a total failure. I mean, the approach, not that the intention of toppling Saddam Hussein might have been a good thing in the end, but there is nothing. There is nothing to. We still go back to that question that was asked once by General Petraeus. Where do we go from there? What do we do after Baghdad fall? And still there were,
there wasn't a plan, and there isn't one.
There is no plan, and the results of what's happening in Iraq today is a bit a result of that, because
and do you feel as though the United States has washed its hands of the problem?
A little bit, like it will with Afghanistan eventually. The problem is other chaos has resurfaced elsewhere on the globe, so the public attention is no longer Iraq, and Iraq is not as strongly tight as it used to be with the U.S. So I guess,
but should the U.S. be more focused then?
Well, the U.S. is probably focused in trying to help the Iraqi army. When Fallujah fell under the jihadist banner in January, there was a lot of talks in the U.S. Army, and especially in the Marine Corps, about, we've lost, the Marine Corps lost about 1,300 men over the course of the war in Anbar province. And a lot of people felt really frustrated because by seeing that those same guys that were facing in the Battle of Fallujah in 2004 were back in control of the area, or some of the area of the Anbar province. That was a major frustration in the U.S. Army, and in military terms. But in political terms, I mean, who can be pleased with what's going on in Iraq today? Who can be pleased with what? I think the old, fracture in Islam between Sunni and Shiite has resurfaced thanks to the Iraq War, and this has spread somewhere else. I think I would not link tightly the situation in Syria with this today, but definitely there's been a Pandora box that was open with the occupation, with the invasion and the occupation of Iraq, and most of all, I think, with the fact that there was no plan after, there was no intention, there was no strategy. That would be my final point.
And that's where we'll end it. Régis Le Sommier, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Abdelraman, Dara, SULEIMAN. I want to thank as well Hadeel Al-SAYEGH for being with us from Abu Dhabi, and Zaid Al-Ali joining us from Yemen. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.